And now on WRS, Michael McKay with the McKay Interview.
Hello, everyone. This COVID-19 mini-series is all about prisms. I mean, looking at the impact, consequences, and implications of the worst pandemic in 100 years through different prisms. And with the help of experts, seeing and understanding complicated matters better, more clearly. Perhaps even learning some things for the very first time. My guest today, the 27th of May, 2020, is Dr. Jean-Marc Rickli, brilliant and very thoughtful member of the Geneva Centre for Security Policy faculty, who's made a study of global risk and resilience. In fact, that is his title. He's the top man, and he's been on my show before 2 years ago, but this visit is different. And you'll hear why in a moment. His academic, intellectual, and professional background include Oxford, King's College London, the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, Gulf States, Boston University, and the list is not by any means complete. Dr. Rickli is a Swiss, and I'm delighted that he's able to join me again, though this time on Zoom. Hello, Jean-Marc. Thanks for making time for me in your very busy schedule.
Hi, Michael. Thank you very much for having me again on your show.
Good to see you, despite the fact that we're on Zoom.
Yeah.
When I read your bio, Jean-Marc, on the GCSP website, I saw words and phrases like modern warfare and security, artificial intelligence, lethal, autonomous weapons systems, ethics of autonomous and intelligent systems, peace, consortium on emerging security challenges. And I thought that listeners might wonder why on earth I've invited someone with your expertise to contribute to this mini-series on COVID-19 and pandemics. Well, there's method in my madness, and here's why. Even though these complex fields of expertise, in the short time we have, I want you to tell me and our listeners what you see through your prism of knowledge when you look at the three areas, time permitting, that I've got to put to you today. All of them very pertinent to the current global pandemic: geopolitics, communications, and if we have time, health. So let's address the big picture first. Geopolitics in these times of COVID-19, the decline in the West, the apparent opposite in the East, the risks that face liberal democracies, the apparent success of the overbearing, personally intrusive, and economically powerful state. Looking through your security, risk, and resilience prism at the big picture coming out of COVID-19, what do you see? What will governments and citizens have to confront with renewed realism that we didn't face up to before? And what will we regard as laughably passé and old-fashioned? What's going to be the cost on our freedoms in the West? And are there any costs to the countries in the East? Jean-Marc.
Well, that's a big question.
It's a big question.
The first one is to look at what this situation has done in terms of the impact on geopolitics. And I would say it has exacerbated some tendencies that we've seen in the past that were growing.
Exacerbated it. I couldn't hear you very well.
Yes, exactly. So basically, we are redefining the structure of the international system. So we inherited from the end of the Cold War a situation when you had one single power who was the hegemonic power, if you're in the United States. By 2001, 2003, with the US global war on terrorism, so-called global war on terrorism, we saw that the US was not as powerful as we might have thought, has been challenged by non-state actors. And so it started erosion of American power. At the same time, what we saw is the rise of China. And the 2010 were characterized by the rise of China. The 2020s probably will be characterized and defined by the growing confrontation between China and the United States. And so what we've seen during this crisis is that tendencies that were already present before this crisis, like commercial war between the US and China, the war for influence on Asia, in Europe, in Africa, has been exacerbated. So this is one aspect that has been magnified. The other is the tendency to see new actors emerging New actors, I mean those who are making money from digital industry, so the so-called GAFAM, Google, Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Microsoft. If you look at the wealth during this crisis, they have increased by a lot. A study recently stated that the 600 billionaires in the US saw their wealth increase by 434 billion. And most of those were those that are working in the digital industry, where those working in the traditional retail or tourism industry has declined. So what we see is a transformation of the international system towards probably a duopoly, China and the United States, at the same time empowering some non-state actors, multinational companies. And the future will tell what will be the structure of the international system, but it looks like it will not be multipolar as we knew it in the past, probably not bipolar as we knew it during the Cold War, but more diffuse system where we have two strong poles and some emerging powers.
So rather like going back to at least the European and Atlantic scene at the end of the 19th century and before the First World War, when the rising power was Germany.
Yeah, in a way, yeah, but we should be careful with comparison. Yes, there was a emerging power, but that were states. In that case, we see China, but we also see non-state actors. And the non-state actors have a tremendous power because they are they basically own, they dictate what happens in the digital world. And as we are increasingly translating physical attributes into digital attributes, these companies gain more and more power. And we saw that with this crisis when it comes to disinformation, for instance. Social media were used extensively by states, by great powers and lesser power to advance a specific narrative. Both the United States and China, but China to a greater extent, use social media to actually push its a narrative that basically try to give a better picture of the way China dealt with the crisis, as well as trying to sow discord within Western states, especially in Europe and in the United States.
So you see this as fake news and propaganda all wrapped up in one bundle.
Yeah, it's a mix of a lot of different techniques. You know, sometimes we call that infodemics. So basically, one strategy is.
Sorry, let me stop you there. That's a new word. Say that word again, Jean-Marc.
Infodemics.
Infodemics. I didn't know
Yeah,
that
so
one. Okay.
pandemics and it's information and pandemics. And basically, the idea here is that you are swarming people with lots of different news, and so people get completely confused, and it's way easier to move your own agenda. A very recent study from the University of Oxford that surveyed 2,500 British citizens across the entire spectrum for May 4th to 11 concluded that 60% of British adults believe to some extent the government is misleading the public about the causes of the virus. 40% believe that to some extent the government, the spread of the virus is a deliberate attempt by powerful people to gain control. And 20% believe that to some extent the virus is a hoax. And about 45% believe that the coronavirus is a weapon developed by China to destroy the West.
And when you, with your intellectual background, look at that, what conclusions do you draw?
Well, a conclusion that is quite concerning because democracies work on the principle of a social contract, which is based on trust in institution and governments. What we see here is that when you start to attack what people are believing in or reinforce their natural psychological biases, what you do, you exacerbate distrust towards governments and institutions. And the same study also points out that those people that are reluctant or don't want to believe government facts, ideas, or traditional news media are also much more reluctant to adopt measures that would prevent the spread of the virus, like vaccination or wearing masks. So here you end up with a worsening of the health crisis that is origins or that is compounded by the fact that people interpret the world in a very different way.
Sorry, go on. No, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go on.
So that is a real concern. We saw that emerging in 2010. We saw that with the Cambridge Analytica scandal. But now, if you consider the growth of emerging technologies, also in the field of artificial intelligence, increasingly we'll be able to develop, to automatize this development of fake news, alternative view, whatever, and we'll be able to target very precisely people's ID and basically magnify their psychological bias. And if you want to undermine democracy, what you do, you create a situation where it is no longer possible to govern, and where trust in institution is lost. And this is one of the weakest points of democracies.
This is where you underline one of the big issues in this recent scandal in the UK regarding the Dominic Cummings not resigning, having broken some of the rules that he set up himself. But let me just, you've already started talking a bit about my next question, Jean-Marc, which is about communication, fake news and propaganda. But let me broaden the word communication to include transport in communication. We've seen, airports almost completely silenced, airlines almost going bankrupt, the government of Germany now giving aid to Lufthansa. We haven't heard much about the world's merchant shipping fleet, but consumer demand has dropped to almost zero. So I guess that must have affected trade on the seas. When you look at what's happening in that area of communication, of the movement of goods and people, with your particularly trained eye, what do you see behind the scenes?
Well, we are going through extraordinary times where we have a global systemic crisis where the world almost stopped. 90% of the global fleet, aviation fleet, is grounded. The global trade in the second quarter of 2020 is forecasted to drop by about 27%. Tourism will go down by between 60 to 80%. So this has consequences in the way people relate to each other. Probably we'll see less physical transportation, and what we'll see on the other hand is a rise of the use of digital communication. That's why also the people I mentioned earlier, Musk, Bezos and others, are making much more money, because people have shifted towards digital means. And so this exacerbates, if you want, the division between legacy industries of the 20th century that were based on physical transportation, on physical contacts, and those of the 21st century that are based much more on digital interaction, and then there is no need to have physical contacts. And so basically that is also contributing to reshape the global geopolitics. So those countries that were already very versed into digital technology will fare much better off than those who were already lacking behind. And as we have seen currently, the pandemic now is hitting really hard Latin and South America. We'll see what will happen with that part of the world. But probably these countries will suffer much more than European countries that have that have managed to go through this crisis with difficulties, but it looks like they are on the recovery slope.
Okay.
So what we probably see is, for the first time since 1998, we see a rise in global poverty. We forecast that this year there will be an addition of 60 to 80 million of people living with less than $1.9 a day.
So that's a rather sad way to end the interview, but I've got one last question for you. And if there's likely to be any upsides, apart from these billionaires doing very well that you mentioned, do you see any upside to the COVID-19 pandemic when you look at the world through the prism that you look through, Jean-Marc? Last question.
Well, we said that in every crisis there are opportunities.
Yes.
I think what this crisis demonstrating is the fact that we are able to continue working remotely. So we'll use in the future much more digital technology. We'll see what will be the impact on the environment. For the last 2-3 months, we've seen a decrease in carbon emission that has never been seen in the past, that are 6 to 8 times more than the biggest drop that was in the early 80s after the crisis of the end of the 70s. To what extent this tendency will last is a question mark, because there is also the risk that we'll try to catch up with what we lost. So big question mark, but hopefully the environment will benefit from this crisis.
Thank you, Jean. Full of very useful information. Thanks for answering all my questions. Always good to talk to you. My guest today has been Dr. Jean-Marc Rickli, Head of Global Risk and Resilience at the Emerging Securities Challenges Program at the Geneva Centre for Security Policy. Many thanks, Jean-Marc.
Thank you very much for having me, Michael.
That was the McKay interview with Michael McKay. And don't forget, you can hear that interview again on our website, worldradio.ch.